All right, it looks like we are recording. Welcome, everyone. This is What Do I Know About Actual Play, except that tonight we aren't actually playing so much as talking about the campaign and how it unfolded. But we are still going to introduce everybody and who they played. I am your game master or guide or whatever term you want to use for that, Jared Rasher. And let's go with John. Please introduce yourself and the character that you played.
Hi, I'm John Carney. I played Charples Canitar, a gnome magician.
All right. And Bob, how about you introduce yourself and your character?
I'm Bob Eberron. Misdirected Mark, word scramble. I am Bob Everson, and I played Kethra Broadfist, who was muscle for hire to help keep Charples and others healthy.
All right. PK, would you like to introduce yourself and the character that you played?
Yeah, I'm PK Sullivan. I'm a freelance game designer, and I played Mac Ture, a shifter investigative reporter who was working on some pretty big stories.
All right. And Ange, what about you?
I'm Ange Murray, and I played Hazel Summersorrow, a doctor slash necromancer slash the person at the newspaper who handled the obituaries.
And yeah, I really enjoyed this entire campaign. I like that we kind of came up with a slightly offbeat frame for what the adventuring company was, which is that everybody was working for the newspaper and following a story instead of some of the more traditional adventurer tropes. And I kind of wanted to circle back around and ask some questions of everybody. And what I would like to start with is, do you have a favorite moment from the campaign? And let's start with Ange.
Oh, geez. I think, like, personally, one of my favorite moments was, I think it was the time we ran into the elf from Eberron, and it was the first time I think the rest of the group got to see Hazel interact with the undead.
Yeah.
And they were all just a little creeped out, and she was still super peppy and enthusiastic. And I loved being able to play with that kind of twist on the necromancer idea.
I like the kind of uncomfortableness everybody had when you were like, yeah, he's got a ghost with him, and it was
Oh, what now?
Yeah. But I think that was like my personal favorite moment. But there are like a lot of little moments that I absolutely love, like Charples in the chair at the restaurant that could go up and down, just that type of thing.
All right, PK, did you have a favorite moment?
I did. It was in our second to last session, and it came from a mixture of my character's abilities and the game and not handling them well. And it's when Mac has had a magical tracker that he planted on the big boss.
Yeah.
And that sort of just set us up for the entire final session. And it's the sort of story beat that I really like in like sort of spy fiction or detective stories, comic things. We see it in Leverage, like the sort of flashback.
Yeah.
But wait, there's this twist to the story. So that was definitely my favorite moment when I was able to pull off something cool like that.
Yeah, the more we got to talking about it, like I knew we were kind of heading towards the resolution of the story, but that really kind of clued me in, like, this is something that one of the player characters is doing, that this should be one of those things that leads to the end. And yeah, it was like a really good flag for that moment. It just felt like it naturally happened in that moment, even if we had to, nudge the way the ability was supposed to work.
Yep.
All right, John, do you have a favorite moment you would like to share?
Yeah, and I thought about this a little bit, and I think it's actually not a game moment so much as it was the time we wrote our first article. And I wasn't actually expecting you to ask us about what that article was. I'm like, what? And we had to come up with something, and that very quickly became sort of my favorite moment. I'm like, of course, we're newspaper people. We have to write articles. It's of course we have to do that. And that was kind of my favorite moment.
I love the filler food review article just because that was a great callback to use for the rest of it.
Nothing like a good puff pastry piece.
I mean, who doesn't love a puff pastry? Rough puff, short, anything is good. Yeah.
And Bob, did you have a favorite moment that you wanted to share?
Yeah, off the top of my head, I think it was when Kethra got her butt whooped by a washing machine. That was fun. It was odd. It was dramatic. So yeah, that was a lot of fun.
I just enjoyed describing the detergent flowing out of it like blood after you guys defeated it. All right. Does anybody have a least favorite moment that they want to share?
When you put Squabbles in danger.
I was hoping I didn't cross any lines there because I wasn't going to literally harm Squabbles, but it was kind of that beat where it's like Squabbles is sort of in danger, but I'm not going to do anything to the
Yeah, and I say that mostly in joking, because like that's one of those you have those moments in games because it makes the tension. It doesn't mean you like it.
Yeah.
It makes the game better.
Yeah.
If it's done right. Don't fridge the pigeon.
It would be a tiny fridge. Oh my goodness. What's really weird to me is as a quick side note here, I actually had the comic where that term comes from, and it was such an odd page to read because you don't expect Green Lantern to try and go that hard.
Yeah, Green Lantern's not a gritty crime comic.
No, but it was the 90s.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, 90s. True. Everyone's edgelord was showing.
Did anyone else have a moment that was not their favorite in the campaign or that could have gone better, whether it was story or mechanics or anything?
Can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Yeah, the story flowed pretty well for me. I don't have any complaints there. Mostly, I think the thing it's not a moment, but the thing I didn't like the most is generally sort of finding the limits of the system to be pretty narrow. I felt like we went off a lot into unsupported areas.
Yeah.
And the system just didn't feel robust enough to cover what we were working for.
Yeah, the powers are all very oddly specific.
And I have we'll touch back on system in a little bit, but is there anything that any of you expected from a campaign about a newspaper that didn't come up? Which I know this is rough because most people probably don't have a lot of expectations about a campaign revolving around a newspaper. But since we did it, were there any tropes that we didn't hit or anything that you were expecting to happen?
We didn't really interact much with a rival paper.
Yeah.
We had a rival reporter at the bridge, but we didn't have another paper that we were trying to top for the scoop or anything like that. That's definitely a trope from newspaper stories, and I could have seen that being a fun and interesting way to introduce a foil. We did touch on it a little bit in the finale when we handed off our all our evidence to another paper to break so that we didn't get murdered.
Yes.
That layer of plausible deniability. But that's about the only trope I was expecting and didn't see come up. I mean, we had the loud, shouty boss, which is always a good trope. We were constantly on deadline. which is another good one. And I think all of us did a good job of embracing sort of the imagery of
Mhm.
a newspaper story with, I think we all sort of leaned into the idea of mid-century or like early 20th century sort of
Yeah.
imagery and vibe of, clothes and whatnot. So we all jived there.
We even had issues with our press.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I know as far as like my brain where most of my tropes come from, one, a lot of it actually comes from superhero comics because I'm used to seeing either Peter Parker with the Bugle or, Lois and Clark with the Daily Planet. And those actually like have burned into my head quite a bit. And even like watching the Venom movie where Eddie is not a completely terrible person. So, I mean, all of that is interesting, but it is weird to have those tropes kind of filtered through another, thing there. But I also grew up watching, what was the Ed Asner show?
Lou Grant.
Yes, Lou Grant.
Mhm.
Lou Grant was definitely a big influence on what I expected, a newspaper story to be like.
Not familiar with that one. What was sort of the high level thing?
It was basically, the twist was that he was playing the same character that he played from Mary Tyler Moore,
Mary Tyler Moore, yeah.
except it was an hour-long drama instead of a half-hour comedy.
Oh wow, okay, that's
Yeah,
It's like that,
It's a
MASH
real
to Trapper John
shift.
MD switch.
yeah. So you were basically seeing how that same character, when he wasn't surrounded by, sillier television personalities and he was at a newspaper, was reacting to people and stories and, seeing how much he was the constant, even when, the people around him were more serious or more comedic.
I would say there weren't any tropes I think we didn't hit, but there was a lot of untapped material that we didn't hit.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's this is the type of campaign storyline that could go on
Oh yeah.
longer.
Yeah,
Yep,
this
was
is
up
this
with
is
Gilmer.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those things, and this is the way I've been running things for the last few years now. Is it's like the Netflix model of running a campaign where it's like, I want to wrap up the season, and if we never came back to this, it feels like an ending, but we could come back for another season if we wanted to.
Yep.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any tropes that they thought of that we didn't quite touch on?
I actually really liked your framing device for the start of every session
Yeah.
of the
Cold
paper
opens were
being
great.
delivered.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That
Or not
was
being delivered.
Yeah.
yeah, that was a nice touch that added some consistency to the story and also acted as a bit of a either call to action or recap,
Yeah.
depending on how you used it. That worked really well.
I like just being able to kind of give a little bit of a glimpse of what the story that one of you might have written, how it affected people when they saw it, at least if I could do that quickly and briefly. But yeah, I like having that idea where you can say, okay, here is the cold open or whatever, and now we go. I kind of like being able to do that, and I am doing something similar to that in the Streets of Avalon game that I'm running too. So
Yep.
Urban environments allow that to really come through, and that's a great use. One of the tropes that you see a lot in this kind of media is the sort of the underworld stoolie, the low life crime guy that you've befriended in some way. We went there a little bit, but maybe more with the high end.
Yeah, he wasn't like the nephew, but
Yeah. Well, he wasn't really our friend there, but yeah.
Yeah.
And we did him a favor.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
A favor.
The nephew was terrified.
He was not fit for that life.
No, he was not fit for that life.
I did enjoy kind of, I don't, there are certain, tropes that I try and be careful of, but I also do kind of like running a halfling crime lord. Just, there's just something that is nice about that. And then also kind of juxtaposing the whole old world, like, from the Talenta plains with the raptors and everything. That's just a lot of that's just it's just fun stuff that Eberron has around its fringes too, though. So would any of you, now that we have done this newspaper-based thing, would you run or play in another campaign that was focused around working for a newspaper?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Playing? Yeah.
And this actually was not my first campaign about working for a newspaper. I ran a Young Centurions campaign a few years ago.
Yeah.
Young Centurions is a fairly short Fate game aimed at younger players, tweens, that sort of thing, based on Fate Accelerated, set in the Spirit of the Century universe. And the framing device I had there was a newspaper that the kids all worked at. A couple of them were just some runners, and then one was like doing his own little newspaper run out of the basement, as his like, this is what I do, and it was a lot of fun.
You were doing like Newsies Centurions.
Yeah.
Oh goodness. Yeah. I was just kind of curious to see if anybody had thought that would be something that they were interested in now after we did that for this campaign.
It has to be the right group. I don't know that my regular group would buy into it. It either they wouldn't buy into it, or it would lead them to some of their behaviors that I've been trying to discourage, like the like fixate on a thing and then spend an hour debating how to handle that thing. And I could see that happening in a newspaper type campaign.
Mm-hmm.
I've been trying to think where to try and fit it into other games that it would be an interesting twist for. I could almost see it being an interesting gang to run in Blades in the Dark, where almost kind of like the vigilante, group where you're mainly trying to expose things and, get more clout instead of, worrying about coin quite as much. But, the dangers of having someone find out where this newspaper is being, created and what it's exposing and everything. That was one of the other concepts for a newspaper I was kind of thinking about there.
That would be a really interesting take.
And also, I think Monster of the Week would be very easy as a framing device for
It's
like some
game.
sort of like Weekly World News type paper where you're actually finding out these,
Yeah, doing.
I have an East Texas University character that used the journalist archetype, and as I've played her over the years in kind of, guest spots here and there, like she actually started an underground newspaper on the campus to be like, okay, here's the real deal. Never go to this place after this time. Always keep salt on your person. Like giving the students the real deal about how to avoid becoming monster food.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the idea of a tabloid journalist campaign in Monster of the Week that's a cool idea.
It's a fun idea. Everyone's doing that thing. It's a different game because, I thought we were telling real stories that mattered, to the people around our little part of the universe. And I took, that it's kind of ridiculous, but I took a little pride in the fact that we were doing a positive thing. A little idealism in journalism, I think, is certainly part of the genre I wanted to be able to play with a little bit.
I really liked the Warforged veteran story that we kind of hashed out.
Good.
That was like one of my favorite moments in the whole thing. So
Yeah.
what about you, Bob? Do you have any thoughts on playing or running in newspaper-based campaigns going forward?
Yeah, I would definitely like to do that again sometime. I can think of a couple of different ways that would be an interesting thing to do. And if I did it again, I would definitely like to be more on the investigating side rather than the hired help.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed the hell out of it, but next time out, I would like to You'd be one of those greedy investigators or a Kolchak type. You could have a lot of fun with that.
The other thing I was just thinking, there are times when I think of these things I go, this would be a challenge, because even if I was up to making adventures for it, I don't know if the players would be able to feed off the energy as much. But the other thing I was thinking was having like someone like Jake Sisko in DS9 and having like a team of Federation reporters reporting on like the Dominion War.
Wow.
That could be an interesting campaign if everybody was really invested in it.
Yeah.
You need some help.
Yeah.
That's something. Yeah.
I think that's the key, is you have to have the player buy-in for the concept.
Mm-hmm.
It's a relatively narrow concept in a larger genre
Yeah.
that you're playing in.
Yeah, because I mean it's basically. Yeah, I'm trying to think of any game I know of that does sort of war observation. Right? Like most RPGs have you participating in the combat.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas being a war correspondent, you are embedded in a unit, but you're not partaking.
Yeah, like the only thing I can think of that might be close is the MASH Allied Apocalypse game, where it's like you're involved in the war, but your job isn't to fight the war.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The other thing that I thought of, and this wouldn't be everybody in the campaign, but I know the Sprawl basically has a playbook for someone that's kind of involved in cyberpunk missions to do their stories, and they have a mechanic for whether you as you're building your story, whether you break the story and everything. And also Headspace in the supplement had an influencer playbook that was also that same. Basically, all of it boils back to Spider Jerusalem and Transmetropolitan, which I love that series. I am not so thrilled with some of the things I found out about the author later on, but like there is something that I kind of like about cyberpunk that is focused around commentary about the world more than just, ooh, look how cool it is that I can think and shoot my gun because I have this brain chip in it. But
That's a good point.
That's
People
me,
attract to that genre for different reasons.
Yeah, and I think I've always been kind of more the noir end of cyberpunk than the high tech. I mean, like, yes, it's high tech, but like, I love Blade Runner. I love the aesthetic of Blade Runner. It's just.
I will take a noir detective story any day of the week. I love that stuff.
Yeah, me too.
All right. So do any of you have an idea of what you would say your character's defining trait was?
Yeah. I did my best to play Mac as someone who is biologically a predator. Right? He is a hunter. When pushed, he becomes aggressive. And sort of on a more comedic note, like he had an all meat diet, right? Like that was just a trait that came out because we started doing meetups at restaurants and things like that. And
Yeah.
I was actually surprised at how much food played into the campaign too.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
it does. Like that's also a trope of the newspaper genre, right? They're always getting hot dogs at the cart, or like meeting up at a diner to talk to someone. Like, it definitely
they're always
fit.
pressed for time.
Yeah,
you got to work and eat at the same time because you're always trying to make more time.
Yeah, they've always got coffee and crappy paper cups that they're carrying with them. So, but yeah, that was sort of my goal with Mac. I was trying to think, how would somebody who is not that far descended from a wolf actually behave in society? Like, how can you take aggressive predator instincts and turn them towards societal good? Which is why he is like this very aggressive investigator into crime and things like that.
That was one of the things I liked about your character, and it was actually for someone that can shift into a more animalistic mode. It was actually, I thought, pretty nuanced, that you would want to do good, but you were also very like, okay, I've done good. I don't want to deal with like the fluffy parts of it or anything. I'm doing big, fast, aggressive good, and now I'm done. Does anyone else have a defining characteristic they think they played out with their character?
Yeah, I think especially by the end, I think it became kind of clear in my head that Kithra was pretty much fearless. She backed down from any challenge. She just waded in and said, "Let's go." And punishment or not, let's do this.
I was trying to, and I hope this came through. Like, once you started kind of describing some of her actions as being more like parkourish combat, I definitely described her getting slammed around a lot, but I hope I didn't make that sound like it's not because she's incompetent, it's because she's trying like really wild stunts.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, she has an attitude that whatever, if I bounce off of something, so be it.
So how about you, Ange? Do you have a defining trait that you think Hazel had?
I think for Hazel, it was her obstinate optimism. She was going to be cheerful no matter what. And I think that was, it's that I'm going to help you whether you like it or not, and you're going to smile.
John, what about Charples?
Yeah, for Charples, it was the book that he wrote that put him in that position, right? The expose book, right? So for him, it was always that he did the right thing. He knew he did the right thing, even though greater good may not have always come out on the positive balance, right? On that side of the teeter-totter. It's still pretty neutral, but he knew it was the thing he had to do. And that was what I really tried to make sure that was always part of that character's motivations. That and the other motivation too was making sure that there was some aspect of the Charples Mac relationship that was trying to explore why they were a good writing team, but very different people.
Yeah,
that was important to me too.
Yeah, I liked how how that kind of developed there.
And when Max said he was going to be an all meat eater, then Charples had to be a vegetarian. Just had to be, because that highlights the difference of why they're different, but can still do really good work.
Did any of you have a different picture of your character and how you thought they were going to go versus how they kind of developed once you started playing them?
Mac developed much more of a sense of humor, largely I think through his relationship with Charples to start, and sort of the banter that John and I developed early on as part of that working relationship, where we were constantly just back and forth. So that I think that smoothed out some of Mac's rough edges that I was I was trying to lean into the rough edges, and then like got a little bit of a sense of humor, and I'm like, no, this is a really good way for the character to go, because otherwise he's just an asshole that nobody likes.
Yeah,
you almost have to develop that whole he's an asshole but he's our asshole kind of endearment to people.
Yep.
That endearment is key, though, because I've played that character that doesn't have the endearment.
So does anyone else did anyone else have a different thought of their character that developed over time?
I didn't really start out. Sorry, Angie, go ahead.
I was just going to say, not really. I think it was more, I filled out some of the ideas I already had about who Hazel was. But I think she stayed pretty close to the vision I had of her when I made the character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same with me and Kithra. I mean, I knew going in that she was going to be the protection, the hired muscle, the fearlessness didn't really take very long to develop. That came out fairly quickly. The parkoury, bouncing around was pretty early on too. Although I will say the only thing that maybe didn't hold up is when I originally made the character. I wrote on the character sheet he, him.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's just my default because
Yeah.
I'm a guy, so I usually just play guy characters because there's not going to be a lot of nuance in there usually. But at some point I started feeling like,
Yeah, I think it was because I had read Kithra and just assumed it was female. And I think I asked you what she was doing. And like I asked that I referred to Kithra as she a few times, and you were like, you know what?
yeah,
Why
it didn't
not?
feel off.
Yeah.
So I was like, you know what? Yeah, she's a she. All right.
Yeah, and
Felt right.
yeah,
felt right.
I like it. It strikes me that in a setting like Eberron, you would definitely have a woman that was a dwarf that would be a bodyguard. That doesn't seem like that would
Oh, yeah.
be
Nothing
strange
out
in
of place there
Eberron at all.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing is strange in Sharn.
That's
Not
true.
really.
But yeah, I did like having that a little bit different, demographic of adventurers there too. And I like that. So Charples, how did Charples change from your envisionment to play?
Yeah, I had intended on playing him a bit more paranoid about everything around him. It just didn't come through. I'm not sure why that is. Probably because it was just, it was so much fun riffing off PK that it was going to have a lighter tone, I think, than I had originally anticipated. But I do think it was important that the weariness of that paranoia did ultimately inform how he behaved in a lot of situations.
Yeah, I think, at least from my perspective, watching you play Charples, I almost got the feeling that you were probably paranoid when the book first came out, and you were just so emotionally worn out that you were just kind of almost, what am I trying to say? You're almost like resigned. Something terrible is going to happen.
A little fatalistic, yeah.
Yeah, there's no point in me being on edge all the time because it's going to happen eventually.
Yeah, and that absolutely right, and that belief was a little liberating.
It's the snark covered up any of the remaining paranoia that he might have had, because the snark was going to come out.
Well, and I noticed that too. Like some of the humor was just like random humor, but some of it was almost like gallows humor, just because it's like, you know what, we're dealing with some messed up stuff here. I really like and appreciate that all of you responded to the Warforged the same way that you might in a modern story with, other people suffering that kind of abuse or, marginalization, because I love the Warforged as a concept, and I really liked the fact that everybody really, played into that idea.
Oh, for sure. Warforged as an analog for an exploited part of society is very strong in Eberron, and it's, particularly in the world we just live in the world we just went through.
Mm-hmm.
It's particularly a raw feeling for me personally.
Yeah, and you can ask Bob how nice I'm being about watch officers or police in my other campaign too. Oh goodness.
So actually, I was gonna say, I find it interesting that John and I had both intended to play our characters both a bit further out in the extremes, but just our dynamic wound up making them both a little bit more humorous and humanizing them.
And it was almost like a natural thing with once they were working as partners, this had an effect on them.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because the two characters felt very much like they would have been very much at home in a buddy movie, you know, and that type of thing where you have the two characters where their friendship kind of in, you know, their friendship slash relationship as it grows through the story informs a lot of who they are and how they interact. And I can see that basically like softening the edges on both of them just a little bit.
Absolutely. 'Cause I come to these genres not through comic books like a lot of people in this hobby do. For me, I've always come through storytelling through film, particularly 70s films. And I just watched a bunch of Robert Redford's 70s films prior to this campaign, all the President's Men and, you know, all those great, you know, movies where he was just the height of his power. And I'm like, that's the world I want to be in. So, you know, seeing Dustin Hoffman playing this reporter, a little bit paranoid, I'm like, that's kind of the model I want to be in, and that's where I wanted Charples to at least, you know, start with. So the buddy cop thing, there's always a buddy aspect to that, right? And that
Yeah.
relationship the buddies have grounds them. It really becomes the better angel voice, you know, in their mind, and that's where I wanted Charples to be.
Yeah, and there's also that moment when, you know, the buddies start realizing that they're acting like the other buddy, and, you know, it like it may or may not be comforting to them.
Yes, I think that happened in Turner and Hooch.
Oh goodness. All right, so here's going to be a softball, at least for some of you I know. How do you feel about Eberron as a setting, and did this campaign affect that feeling?
I love it. It's my favorite D&D setting. Don't say anything bad about it.
Yeah, that's a big fat softball right over the center of the plate. Eberron is fabulous because of all of the stuff that it gives you. The action oriented, you know, lightning rail and airships and casual magic being used for, you know, day-to-day things and just a variety of different everything that you've got around you. So much you can do with that setting, and I've had some really good campaigns that have had some amazing stories in them. So it's definitely one of my favorite settings of all time.
I will say this game, you know, while it didn't come out a lot in the other game, this game kind of started informing my attitude towards the Warforged in my other game. You know, like, you know, it wasn't like my characters have ever been like anti-Warforged or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I definitely started taking on like a softer, you know, more sympathetic view towards the Warforged in that other campaign as well after playing in this one.
I loved getting to do the scene with the Warforged that had died at the police station. Like that was, I was hoping that's one of those moments. I wasn't specifically saying it's going to happen in this episode after this, but I was like thinking at some point I really want to do this because she can see souls pass on. I want her to have this, you know, this opportunity, and that just seemed like a good place to drop it when it finally came up.
Yeah, no, that was a good one.
So, PK, what were your thoughts on Eberron before and after the campaign?
So my experience with the canonical published D&D settings is pretty minimal. I read a number of Dragonlance novels, and I've played, I don't know that I've ever played in Eberron before. I have played a Warforged before several times, but I don't know that I've ever played in Eberron. The only D&D campaign I've played that was set in one of the canonical settings was in 4th edition Forgotten Realms. The game had started off as organized play and then spun off into our own stories. So I don't have real strong opinions about the the settings, but I do really enjoy what we got to play. I liked Sharn and sort of the Sharn strikes me as a weird hybrid of your classic high fantasy city
Mm-hmm.
and sort of the mid-century pulp novel City of Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right? It's a mixture of like forward-looking future architectural things and sort of that split of society of the upper crust and the people who don't have as much, but it's all magical.
And I kind of love the fact that it is not subtle about that gradation. Like, you might have another fantasy city where this is a bad neighborhood, but it is literally like the further up you go, the more exalted and wonderful the city looks. And then you kind of get in the middle place, and it's still pretty neat. There's lots of magic, but you still gotta do your job. And then you get to the bottom where it's touching the ground and it's not lifted up into the air like so much of the rest of Sharn. And it's like, no, this is this is what you would expect from a city when somebody's got to when somebody is the group that is working to provide for the others.
Yeah. But yeah, so like I really enjoyed the story we told and the setting elements that were here. But it's people probably noticed if they watched or listened, I had to ask a lot of questions about the politics and the organization of the setting. And that's just because of my lack of familiarity, not because Jared wasn't communicating anything clearly. It's just I didn't know these things. So yeah, I enjoyed playing in Eberron. I am happy to play again, but I'm not somebody who's super familiar with the lore or the setting.
John.
Yeah, I have to be. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I was gonna say, I have to be very careful to not start nerding out over the lore and stuff. I think there were a couple of moments in the game where I got, like, because I, as the player, recognized what Jared was putting in front of me, I got to be like, oh, that's a this in character as well as out of character.
Yeah, and I was trying to throw those moments more towards you than, doing the GM, info dump. It's like, you know what? This is something that Hazel probably knows. Why don't you run with that? So, John, what were your feelings about Eberron before and after the campaign?
Yeah, I've played an Eberron before, and particularly in fourth edition, but I try not to hold that against the setting. It was, it's the idea that you've got a technology base based on low magic capability is something that leaks into every D&D campaign in a high fantasy setting, whether you want it to or not, right?
Mm-hmm. So
having it adopted in Eberron in day one is great, and that's where I think Eberron shines. In those cities and urban environments like Sharn, and for me, Eberron in Sharn makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
When you chase it outside of the city and try to do high fantasy stories in other parts of that setting, it doesn't work as well. It doesn't go as well.
It can
you just
work, but you have to lean into like that Indiana Jones explorer type of pulp drama type of story.
You're not Conan. You're
yeah, for sure, and that's great insight. So I'm happy to play it inside of Sharn and never leave that environment. And Sharples would never leave the city, so it's perfectly fine. And when I see a big city, and I'm a city kind of guy, I love cities. I see this combination of Chicago and New York and and Danny Elfman's soundtrack. I hear that. I see Tim Burton's Batman Chicago story. Analogs that he puts in all this, and that's what I see when I see a lot of Sharn. When you get out of the really glitzy, super nice places, it turns into that really fast.
See, now I reflexively have to mention this, that I like at least 2 of the Nolan Batman movies. And I still miss, though, the fact that in the 89 movie that they literally built city blocks just to be Gotham City. They didn't use another city to be Gotham. That was Gotham. And that is something visually that is very striking about that one versus just about any other time that Batman has been on film.
on the other hand, living in Chicago and seeing Chicago be Gotham City,
Yeah.
and knowing the locations, and it's actually really funny. They really only filmed in the tourist trap areas. It was all in the Loop and River North. They didn't get out into any of the other areas. It was all strictly downtown.
It's all iconic imagery they were
Right.
in mining for sure.
But like, I mean, even for the like the one that really stands out is when the Batmobile like does that crazy turn down in the down the ramp and turns around and barrels past the cops and Batman Begins. That's still right downtown, right? That area is called Lower Wacker Drive. It's right next to the river. It's just kind of funny. But no, I agree. Like the imagery of Tim Burton's Batman is unlike anything else because it is a comic book put on film.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you could, if you looked at that looked like Gotham City. Just like, to a certain extent, I got very used to Metropolis looking like it did in the Superman animated series. Metropolis should look like this highly polished, like almost, like you're saying, that 40s, this is what the city of tomorrow will look like sort of, place instead of a real city,
Yep.
Yeah, this whole Art Deco New York vibe thing is pretty wild. Superman. Yeah.
So yeah, now that we've toured other fantasy cities here, what's funny about Eberron is I did not get into it in the 3.5 era at all, because we've talked about this before on an Gnomecast, but like when I was getting stuff in the 3.5 era, I was getting Realm stuff and core books, and there was stuff coming out so often I couldn't jump on Eberron 2. Like, it looked great, but I couldn't do it, and I had been a long time Realms fan. I now kind of think that Eberron almost works better as the core D&D experience, because it can pull in more adventuring tropes than just a standard, high fantasy setting can.
Yeah, it's not restricted to Tolkien-esque
Yeah.
fantasy.
Yeah, and my
I mean,
issue
not that any other D&D setting necessarily is, but they all lean that way more.
Yeah.
my issue with my issue with the Forgotten Realms is that it's constantly changing. So you end up with these folks who've been playing it since it came out, and like they can start reciting you the history of the entire world, and if they don't have the social acumen to know when to turn that off, it can get really intimidating to try and play in that world with them. It's one of the reasons why I had always said I would never run a D&D game set in the Forgotten Realms, because there was no way I could possibly GM it to the satisfaction of the true fans. I think I've changed that opinion over the years. I'd be like, no, they can suck it up and deal with what I give them. But that's me changing as, my confidence as a GM. But when Eberron came out, it was like, oh, this is a new setting. It doesn't have the same years of lore that the Forgotten Realms has, and it's kind of got a fun steampunky feel to it that I like. So I was like, Eberron was definitely my setting that I dove into.
The other thing I think they were very wise in doing, and this is coming from somebody that, bought the old gray box set in 1987 for the Forgotten Realms, but the smartest thing they did with Eberron was to say, hey, we're going to put out novels, but none of them were canon.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I've always loved that Keith Baker like flat out says, he's like, this is what is set up in the book. What it means, what caused it, what happened, I don't know.
Yeah, there's certain things we're not going to answer.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's up to you to decide in your campaign with your players.
Such a good writer too. It's like when you read his campaign stuff, like, it all just makes sense. It's easy to read. You can digest it. It stays with you. You're not trying to parse grammatical concepts that are beyond the material. It's really something you can kind of take home with you when you read it.
And for anybody that enjoyed the 5th edition Eberron book that WotC put out, I would definitely recommend getting the Exploring Eberron book that Keith Baker put out, because it is a really neat expansion that you don't normally see from a DM's Guild product, because it's from the person that originally conceived of the setting and adding stuff that he wishes he could have gotten published before. And I will throw this much in there. Some of yes. some of Gilmer's backstory was inspired by stuff that I had read in there. So
Cool.
all right. So now that we have talked about all of this, I wanted to ask people what their thoughts were on the Quest RPG system.
Well, I will say that if we had been using any other system, I would not have made Hazel.
Mm-hmm.
Like the system led me to create a relatively unique character that I probably wouldn't have made in traditional D&D.
Mm-hmm.
That said, the mechanics are weird and were, like I said earlier, were oddly specific and sometimes designed to take you out of the moment of the game that you're already in. Like, there was definitely at least one ability Hazel had where I'm like, I want this because it makes sense for her to have it, but I don't want to play with the mechanics. Because the mechanics where the game stops, you do a different side game, and then come back with the information the character would have gotten from the ability.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on Quest?
Oh, I've got a lot. So Quest's major strength is it's not D&D. It's light. It can play pretty quickly, but as I said, we hit the limits of what the game supports pretty quickly. It doesn't have a lot of toothiness to its base system, and even some of the very base design decisions didn't jive with me. I was engaging on Twitter with some friends, Rob Donahue and Rob Wieland, I think, earlier this week.
Yeah, I think I saw that.
Where they were talking about a couple of games, or they were talking about Fate, actually. And Rob Wieland had mentioned that Fred Hicks, the other person responsible for the creation of Fate, described Fate one time as a diceless game wearing a dice mustache, and how that really informed his style of play with Fate moving forward. And it sort of clicked in my head, and I quipped back. I was like, so what does that make Quest RPG? Is that 3 diceless games in a trench coat trying to fit in with a PBTA crowd? Because, when we look at the game, it's most of the abilities don't require a dice roll that I've seen. Most of the abilities are just, they happen, or you spend a resource to make them happen. A lot, which is really nice and empowering. You don't have to gamble for that. But the downside is the dice mechanics are so simple, and there is no way to be good at a thing when you roll the dice.
Yeah.
There are no modifiers. There's no different scales of effect. It's just, here, roll a single d20, add no modifiers.
Yeah.
Where does your die roll show up here? There's not even any reroll mechanics that I've seen, but I didn't delve into all of the abilities that deeply. So even PBTA games give you a sliding scale of modifiers from like -1 up to +2 or +3, which dramatically change your effectiveness when rolling a character. So having a d20, which is a flat distribution curve, against a static set of difficulties, 50% of the time you'll succeed, 25% of the time you'll be given a tough choice, 25% of the time you fail in some fashion. Okay, fine, but it left the fortune bits, the randomization falling flat for me.
Yeah.
And I think
For sure.
because the powers that each character could get as they advanced were so very specific that, you know, if we're playing this as a narrative game, a lot of times Jared was left with nothing other than, okay, roll a die, because the powers were so specific
Yeah.
that they only applied to very specific moments. And unless you as a player, you know, kind of, you know, metagamed to get to that moment to use that ability, it's okay, roll a die and we'll see what happens, which I think limits your creativity and flexibility on the story you're telling with the mechanics.
Mm-hmm. Bob, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I agree with pretty much everything that's already been said, and I like where they were going. You know, the path that they started on, what their apparent goals were with the system, and to a degree, as PK already said, it runs pretty quick. It's fairly simple. It's easy to put this down in front of some people and go, hey, parse this and go. I think that definitely is a bonus for it, because anything that you can put on the table and get people up and running quickly is a good thing, especially if it's a not D&D thing, because you know there are more games out there in the world than D&D. I love D&D. I've played almost every edition of D&D, but there's other games out there that do other things, and sometimes they do them way better than D&D will. And if you play them, you I think you will enjoy them. So I like where they were going. I kind of had a slightly different view from Ange. I felt like I did not feel like the fighter powers were super specific. I think they were less specific than maybe the necromancer powers. But what I did see was, and this may be a factor of how we maybe diverged a little bit from the system, the way it was intended, possibly. For example, with the action point economy, we went into the last session. I had 37 AP.
Yeah.
I have thoughts on this, but I want to get everybody else's.
And I had like 2 things that I had like 7 or 8 of the fighter powers, I think, or maybe 8 or 9, and only like 3 or 4 of them made me spend a point. I think one of them was a 2-pointer.
I think I was the only one like
you
trying to maintain.
had like tons of things like, oh, I got to spend points. I got to, you know, like you were spending points left and right.
Yeah,
and
like, I was the only one having to manage my economy on saving points. Well, I gotta save some points to keep Kethra up.
Yep.
So, and I don't know if you really want to use the word balance.
I would strongly use that word.
I mean, that was my gut feeling. There's a part of me in the back of my brain that's like, not everything in the game needs to be balanced, but I think that's not a broad thing across the board. Some games need to have a fair balance.
That even if it's not like being able to provide like an equation proving that this is as valuable as this, at least having things designed to where they feel structurally similar, instead of being greatly divergent.
It doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, there's a 1-for-1 mirror between the necromancer and the fighter that everything matches up.
If every class had a starting thing that cost a certain variable number of points for one of its beginning abilities, and then another one didn't cost points, I think that, you know, that kind of consciousness about design might have helped a little bit, instead of like, well, for this class, this barely uses any points, and, you know.
In our final session, I spent 12 points to create the 3 doses of poison, and I ended the session with 15 AP.
So John, do you have any
points on my sheet?
So the magician class used AP quite a bit. I think more than anyone. It's probably the second most, I guess, in the game. First, I got to start with the D20. You know, and I love D20s, so they're rolling D20s. But if you're going to put a D20 in front of me, something with that inherent spikiness of outcome, and not give me a way of character competency to impact the range of success, I'm just going to be wondering why am I rolling the D20?
Yeah.
You know, we're doing coin flips, and that's, you know,
I,
I don't get it, and I never will.
I just checked. Hazel had 7 points left
Yeah.
at the end of the campaign.
So we've talked about that. I don't want to revisit it. I think there's probably an answer there, and I'd love maybe someday to hear it, but I'll never understand it. The problem, I think, with the way the APs work through the spells is the balance pass. I don't think didn't happen, particularly between the different schools of magic. The wild fluctuation between early spells and the progression path, the later spells was very all over, very very varied, I guess, between, you know, a 2 power, a 2 cost power, a 4 cost power, a 2 cost power, and in each school of magic had a different philosophy as to what that 4-1 was going to be. And I looked through all the different spells, you know, where you hit that curve in expending was you know, it didn't make any sense. It was good. Some of the spells had a really interesting mechanic, which they should really dive deep into pretty hard, which was this is the base cost. If you want to do more, it costs this much more. And that's a great thing. That gives you plenty of ways to spend your power. You can choose to really go bonkers if you need to. There's some stuff that I think works really well. You're going to do a 0 AP power. You're going to have a random effect. The randomizer comes into play in the design, and that always is a great choice. And I love to see things like that. What was something else that was kind of weird? I had a tip of my tongue, but I think I just forgot it. Anyway, I get it. Oh, I know what it was. When you go down the path of removing impact on the randomizers and give yourself AP points, but don't take the time to define basic character capabilities of a fundamental day-to-day life, you know, of an adventurer. You cut off a way for the game master to improvise new systems that are required that your simple rule sets don't allow. There's no modularity to the design. I mean, there is, but it's going to be hard for the game master to whip that out and really come up with something that, you know, I got to make an art history check. What do I do in the system? You know, if there's some sort of basic competency for everyday skills that you can lean an action point cost against, you know, history check to learn information costs you 1 AP. Great. From there, it can extrapolate to other kinds of knowledge checks or different kind of dexterous moves with a modifier, if that's how we need to roll it. There's no way for the game master to really riff on that system's openness to expand it on the fly. And with a rules like game like Quest, you really need to have, I think, something like that to just give you a little bit one more tool in your toolbox.
What was interesting to me, I think, because I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about how, you know, this system worked, and I wrote a review of it. And even in my review, I said it's very compelling to want to play this game when you read through it. And I stand by that. I still fully believe that. I will say, if you wanted to have the randomizer and not have stats come into it, I really wish they would have built in some form of advantage disadvantage. At the very least, if you could have like spent, say, 3 AP to roll with advantage, you know, which would give you something more for the classes that didn't have, you know, AP heavy abilities to spend it on, and also it would be able to say, in this moment, this is important for this to succeed, which is, I mean, that goes back to fate and, you know, understanding that, you know, that the whole fate, you don't get how to run fate until you finally understand that everything is the fate point economy, and the fate point economy is about pacing how the story progresses. You know, that's really, you know, you want to take some hits early on and in the middle of the story, because that's the way a story progresses. And you get to act 2 and everybody gets beat up and you don't know how it was going to resolve. But now you have all these resources when you finally get to act 3 and you want to resolve things. And there isn't that kind of awareness of a structure. So even though it feels like a more story-based game, it isn't really a story-based game. And there's one other thing mechanically from a GM standpoint, and that is, I really think with it being as open-ended as it is, if you're going to have so much stuff resolved by action points, I wish there was an economy for the guide to spend points to introduce things or to change things or to do things too. Because what you're doing when you hand this game to the guide is, this is very open-ended, there's not many rules for this, so you're making up everything.
Yeah.
You're resolving everything.
There's a lot of cognitive load there.
Yes, there are some basic principles, but the basic principles are good. They're basically saying, make sure everybody's having fun, make sure that, you know, you're playing up how fanciful everything is, you know, make sure you're being safe. All that stuff is in there and it's good, but there isn't the focus genre things that like a Powered by the Apocalypse game would say, where it's like, no, this is what your hard moves look like. This is what, you know, you're supposed to be driving towards for this type of story. And ironically, I really think that Quest, despite kind of looking like a story-based system, I think I would have had more fun running it more like a traditional D&D game. And by that, I mean, like, you're going to go out adventuring. I'm going to throw 20 different monsters at you. You're constantly dealing with monsters. Here's some more monsters. Here's some more stuff that you have to deal with. I think that would have actually played more with that action point economy. Ironically, I think I would have been more comfortable running this campaign if we had made all of our characters with 5e D&D. Which is funny because I wouldn't say that 5e D&D is great at doing a newspaper-based story, but I honestly think that I would have been more comfortable running this story, knowing the boundaries and how
well,
D&D
you have
does
you have
things.
skill checks and that
Yeah.
sort of framework in D&D in order to work with that.
Mm-hmm.
Here, there's nothing for that. There are no skills. There's no competencies. It's so bare bones that, you know, yes, you have a lot of freedom, but it's also sort of like the rules are just a tightrope.
Yeah, so
you can go anywhere, but you're not going to stay on that rope.
A little too much freedom.
Yeah, and that's why I didn't want to end this like pounding on Quest, but I think my problem with it was I tried to make a square peg fit in a round hole, because Quest really is better at emulating the core basic D&D thing. You're going to go out and adventure and probably run into a bunch of monsters and have to kill them and heal each other and maybe investigate some clues, but it's going to be clues that, you know, a certain class is good at spending things for, but it's more like action, 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 action. The one thing that does make that a little bit more difficult in Quest, though, is there is no change in hit points, which was something I was running into with all of you. It's like some fights were really easy, but if you got hit, you're only like 2 hits away from dying.
Yep.
And that's a weird pacing
don't give
mechanism
me hit
too.
points, right?
Yeah.
That's a real thing. And then you want to go to something a little bit different for you know, the injury system. That makes more sense.
I think what you're saying about Quest working better in a more D&D, not even a loot game, but like a traditional dungeon delve, or, you know, that sort of thing. If you look at the rules, that's what they're focused on, right? That's what the rules are for. So yeah, that's definitely makes sense. Also, it's called Quest. It's not called Investigate.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
we
called,
definitely took it out of its wheelhouse.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I knew I was pushing it a little bit, but I also, part of my thought process was a lot of people when Quest first came out talked about shifting their D&D games over to Quest and basically saying, well, if you can do it in D&D, you can do it in Quest. I don't think that's true.
I would agree. I don't think that's true.
Yeah. No. I think if you're if you're doing the traditional dungeon crawling, hex crawling, wilderness type thing, and the GM is okay with adding a bunch of story details without a lot of guidelines, I think it's going to run a lot better for that type of game than anything that's more, you know, a little bit to the left of center of a standard D&D campaign.
Yeah, overall, when I look back on the whole thing, when you said that you wanted to do this, I was very excited because I had stumbled upon this, I think maybe on Twitter, and I went, Quest RPG, what is this about? And I looked at it and I'm like, this is very intriguing. I had that same feeling, like I am very intrigued about putting this down on the table and trying it out and seeing how it works after looking at it. And overall, my gut feeling is there's a lot of positive to the idea. I think if they went back and they tweaked a few things here and a few things there, smoothed out some of the rough edges, there's a solid game here.
Mhm.
And there's probably tons of people that would take this thing as it stands right now, put it down on the table and go play a game and enjoy the hell out of it,
Mhm.
because that's the direction that they would be going, in the same direction that Quest is going, and they'd be
Yeah.
okay, fine, this is good. We took it and we kind of went sideways on it and said, can it bend? And we were like, not so much. But I would be very interested to see if they ever went back and said, let's do a 2.0 and
Advanced
Yeah.
Quest.
or advanced Quest, whatever, however you want to spin it. I would be very curious to see how they would tweak it to make it different.
Mhm.
But they put a game together with the express purpose of, hey, let's make a game that we can play like a D&D game without playing D&D.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have not ever made my own RPG and put it out on the table and said, here's the thing I made. I've read a whole bunch of other people's games. So kudos to them for actually sitting down and doing it,
Mhm.
and it's interesting. It's got nuggets. It's, I think it still needs a little bit of work, but it's a good start.
The other thing that I really want to call out as being really quite good is the presentation of the game.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The PDF is wonderfully readable.
Yep.
It's very well laid out. It's very well indexed. It's honestly just a really good, easy read.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know because we're playing digitally and I don't have the components, but I think the other things that they have here, the various decks,
Mhm.
could be really useful game aids
At
Yeah.
the table.
Sure.
at the table, and I think that could work really, really well. So
Mhm.
I think they are, like, outside of just the game system, I think they're doing good things for the hobby and moving things forward, because I would really like to see how those cards work
Mhm.
at a table rather than just playing on stream where
Yeah.
I've copied and pasted images into a PDF for my character sheet.
Yeah. I would say one of the things about it when I read it, part of why I think it was compelling to want to play it is, I have done a few reviews and I've read a few books, and there are times when I will get halfway through a book and I'm almost getting anxious because people have vaguely referenced rules and not explained them yet. And, I'm getting halfway through this thing and going, just stop and explain something, or don't tell me any rules yet. One or the
Don't
other.
mention it unless you're going to tell me about it, because otherwise.
And this
Stop
does a
teasing
really
me.
good job of leading you from one topic to the next topic to the next topic. And it is very good at that. That is definitely, as far as introducing you to a game and walking you through it, it does a brilliant job of that. The book is gorgeous. It's really nice. It's a great presentation, and it's just like we said. I don't think we were using the end of the screwdriver to beat a nail in.
I mean, maybe, but
There are still things about the system that
yeah,
I will not find fulfilling in long-term play.
Yeah.
There's
But
just
I
not
would be
enough.
happy to, if somebody said, hey, if I'm at a convention, somebody said, hey, I don't have anything going on this afternoon, you want to play a pickup game of Quest? Yes, we can do that, because we can make characters in 5 minutes and we can just be in and playing a game. Like, it's faster to make characters here than it is in a PBTA game.
I will say that, like I don't think I would have made Hazel in any other system because the way the Doctor was presented.
Mhm.
But as we're discussing this and you're talking about, it might be better in a more traditional, dungeon delving, wilderness exploration type of fantasy game. I don't know what role the Doctor would play in that. Because I went with the Doctor because it sounded like an interesting character that would fit in a city campaign.
Yeah, it was definitely something that sounded more Eberron-ish.
But like the abilities were just they weren't quite there. But I also don't see how they would support the character in in that dungeon delving game, other than them standing back and waiting for Kithra to get hurt and then healing Kithra again, and that type of thing.
Well, it is also interesting that as much as I do think that it's more geared towards that traditional experience, the other thing that is interesting is that it's not a thief or a rogue, it is a spy.
Mhm.
And it is definitely more flavored towards being a spy rather than being a traditional rogue. And part of that is just because you're not checking for traps.
Right.
You don't want to rely on a flat D20 roll to check for traps.
No, you definitely don't, because anyone can do that. Right?
The other thing I wanted to bring up, and you've run the other game that I'm going to bring up that I'm thinking of here, is one of the things that, even though I like it, like Kids on Bikes and Kids on Brooms both have kind of a wide range of resolution tiers. Like when you look at the chart, there's like 10 above, 5 above, meat, 5 below.
Actually, I haven't run that one. I run Tales from the Loop.
Oh my gosh, I thought you'd run Kids on Bikes. I'm sorry. Okay,
yeah, it's probably
never mind.
I refer to Tales from the Loop as a Kids on Bikes
yes.
game.
But I like the game when I read through it, but as a GM, when I look at that many tiers of resolution, my brain starts going, okay, when there's 3 different states of, like, I can handle 2 states of success, but 3 starts making me think, okay, is this just like a nudge in the right direction, or should they actually succeed? And then what's the middle look like? And then and I think I could handle it in that, because there's some more guidelines to what each one looks like on the chart. It's just that looking at the chart, it's like, oh wow, there's like 10 different states of resolution here. But that is, there were almost too many states of resolution in that D20 roll, because there is like catastrophic failure and failure, and then failure with a cost, and then
Success with the cost.
Success with a cost, and
tough
then
choice, yeah.
6. It was like, man, some of those, it was like, I would rather this was just like 6 minus 7 and 9.
See, for me, I come from a strong fate background.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just what that D20 range is to me.
Yeah.
Because honestly, the critical and the critical, the 1 and the 20, the extreme critical failure, critical success, whatever, you can always amp those up, and like that, everybody does that in basically any game. But it's the failure, success at a cost, and normal success are like, that's my sort of wheelhouse. And then a little extra gravy when you get success with style in Fate. Like that's always, like, I've played so much Fate that's my natural tuning. And I actually like games that give you that mixed success, or even better, you will fail unless you take this deal that the GM offers you. So I do appreciate that Quest put that in there, but it's 25% of it's 20% of the die range, because it's the 2 to 5, or sorry, it's 6 to 10 is the success. So it's 25% of the time. And then 50% of the time you're succeeding in some fashion with no complication. So it's, I don't know. Yeah, the flat curve still leaves me feeling flat.
So on that note, if you were going to look back at how this entire campaign unfolded, what game system would you have picked for this?
So that's not an easy question, because I'm a very, very strong proponent that system matters, and the system you choose will inform the story
Yes.
you tell. So I'm going to give you a few answers. And it really depends on what we would have wanted to lean into more.
Mm-hmm.
If we wanted more action and adventure, one of three choices. Fate, because that's my go-to.
Yeah.
And I think in Fate, it's really easy to create our characters as they existed in Quest,
Mm-hmm.
pretty straight across, especially since we can have high concepts involving being investigative reporters.
Yeah.
We can give Charples the trouble of, publish an expose on the
That's a great
halflings
aspect. Yeah.
or on the gnomes. Yeah. So like we can really lean into the things that we were putting into our characters,
Mm-hmm.
but the game wasn't really supporting.
Yeah.
We could do 5e D&D because that does adventure and it has enough of a framework for investigation to support that side as well. A Cortex Prime game could be really interesting, but that would be a heavier lift because you have to design the game.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, I love Cortex, and I can't wait to get Cortex Prime to the table, but it's the toolkittiest
Yes.
toolkit game that I've ever seen. Like, it is not a game in its presentation. It is a set of tools for you to make your game, which I love and I will be doing.
Oh yeah.
But
I'm excited, but I'm
bit of a
also
heavy
excited
lift.
to see some finished versions of it going forward to see how they do things differently.
Yeah, the example games they provide are wonderful there.
Yeah.
If we wanted to focus more on investigation, I don't know of just a blank Gumshoe game.
Yeah, it's the one I was going to bring up.
But Gumshoe is the system I would want to do for investigation. But there's not just is there just a Gumshoe, or is Gumshoe the system?
I don't know that there's one that has a way to integrate the magic.
Well, Swords of the Serpentine is coming out, and I have the preview document, the pre-publication one that isn't formatted yet. That is something that I kind of thought about, although that is also very much kind of leaning towards the Fafford and Mauser type thing where, it's not as much fantastical magic. It's more like somebody in an alleyway could stab you and a sorcerer might spend an hour chanting and then cause you to go blind temporarily, that type of,
right.
Yeah, but Gumshoe would work great for the newspaper investigative side of things.
Yep. And then depending on which Gumshoe rule set you're starting from, the combat can be wherever it is. And then
Gumshoe.
Well, I was gonna say that's actually on my. I was like baby bubble Gumshoe because I think bubble Gumshoe is the one that is least setting dependent. All the Gumshoe games I'm familiar with are very focused on their settings. And then lastly, if we wanted to play it more as a comedy, because there definitely was a strong comedic tone here, Inspectors. Making an Inspectors version of this campaign would be a relatively light lift and just a lot of fun.
Oh goodness. Yeah, I'm just thinking about the confessionals that we would have had.
Yep.
Those would have been hilarious.
Like I said, I can see any one of these games working, but they all look very different.
Yeah.
I'm not the biggest fan of Fate, but of all the games discussed, that's the one I could easily see translating Hazel into.
Gumshoe actually does have a fantasy with magic. They have Lore Finder, which is specifically called out to go along the lines of like Pathfinder. But it's Gumshoe, and it's got adventure and questing and spells, and so yeah, you could do it in Gumshoe.
I mean, I've had my issues with Gumshoe as well. I've tried to run some small campaigns of Night's Black Agents, and I always seem to run into this wall where there's just a thing that the game doesn't seem to support that is happening in play, and I'm just like, okay, I got to make a calling here, but I don't know what to do.
There's definitely games that I think are very strong concepts that also have very steep learning curves for people, that in general. Like, I loved the games of 7th that I ran, but I know that game can have a huge disconnect. Second edition, at least, can have a huge disconnect from somebody reading it, especially if they have been used to more traditional RPGs and trying to wrap their brain around how that game does things. Any other game systems that anybody can think of here?
Oh, you got to talk about PBTA, right? I mean,
Yeah.
As iconic as the characters were, there's definitely moves that we leaned upon. And in fact, if you think about the action point spend as being a playbook, there's a lot of that there, and I think it would have supported a great deal of our gameplay better. But I don't think the investigation works quite as well there either. I think that those things just kind of happen.
No,
works quite as well.
Monster of the Week does a good job with investigation and mystery.
Yeah, you
honestly,
could definitely run into Monster of the Week rule set of PBTA, and we'd had fun with that for sure.
I've gotten very spoiled between PBTA and Star Trek Adventures when somebody makes a check to investigate something, me just saying, ask your question and I will answer you honestly. And, if you generated more momentum, you can spend and ask me another question, because then I'm not trying to guess ahead of time at what things to, lay out there as clues.
Yeah,
it's
the
more
single
like
currency value in the two. And I was going to say, I was thinking about this game from a 2D20 perspective, but you kind of have the same problem as Cortex Prime, which is you're going to have to go build the game out of those to make it work. And there's but man, that would be so much fun, because you could really nail those stats where you wanted them and get those skills.
There's some
yarn and.
Have they come out with a generic 2D20 book yet?
No, they didn't. But if you play, Star Trek Adventures, you can see the DNA there, and it doesn't take a lot to sequence it, I think, into another system.
As far as their fantasy things, I think I would lean more towards Dishonored than Conan if you were going to use a fantasy implementation, because just the whole like industrial punk thing kind of is a little closer to Eberron. And
you definitely wouldn't want to go John Carter. That's Sword and Planet is not where you want to be.
Not what you want to do now.
And Conan is a lot more granular than a lot of the other D20 implementations that I've seen. Like after I started reading through that one compared to, actually, Dishonored is a little bit lighter than Star Trek even.
Yeah. The one thing.
Go ahead, Bob.
You finish up.
I was going to say the only 2D20 game I've played is Star Trek Adventures, so I'm not sure. Do they have the same sort of? Do all of them rely on the same mechanisms of generating momentum by getting extra successes?
Yes. Well, at least I can say this because I've read the John Carter one, I've read Conan, and I've read Dishonored, and those are all similar. It's the way you derive your stats that are a lot more granular in Conan, because there's more steps that will give you 1 or 2 points here or there. And Dishonored does not use the D6s to resolve anything. It's just flat D20s, and then a weapon does this much damage. It doesn't, you don't roll the D6s and look for numbers or successes or anything. Yeah.
So it simplifies that a little bit, but you're still doing this plus that. Is your thing, and then you have some currency that comes out of a success with style. Let's say if you roll very well, and that's all they really want is I want that currency to show up and play with it. I just don't want to be overwhelmed by the different kinds of currencies I might have to play with, which is why I would not recommend doing this in the Genesis
being harassed
system.
by your princess, John?
That's Chester Buttons. Chester Buttons, the male cat, is particularly vocal about his displeasure. I can actually tell them apart just by their meows, of course.
I mean,
that's Chester Buttons, yeah.
The funny thing is, I don't think it would take a lot of reflavoring to even use Dresden Files Accelerated for this.
Yeah, the mantles make a lot of sense for
the
archetypes that we came up with.
A lot of the mantles would be really easy to adapt to like Eberron type roles.
Mhm.
Yeah, that would work.
And
Mhm.
I love
Definitely.
aspects as an investigation where your investigations create persistent aspects that go through that, so you can see those build up.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Literally on your screen or at the table, and your clues are right there. And I love that part of Fate, and that would be great as a Fate game. It's a Fate accelerated game.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I missed from my Dresden game that I was running, is putting the clock on the table once they started doing stupid public things. Like, when this fills up, the authorities will arrive.
Nothing
time to go.
focuses the mind like a deadline.
Mhm.
I will say that after all of the different games that I've played, sitting on a podcast with two people that know how to break a game down for years now, the one thing when it comes to investigation, whether the game is about investigation or not, any kind of RPG, when you've got an investigation, the worst thing you can do is not give the clues to the players.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Which means if you're sitting there playing D&D 5e and someone rolls an investigate check, they should get the clue. If they
Yeah.
roll a 1, they should get the clue.
Absolutely, there
Something
can be
else
no
should
failure.
happen,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but they should get the clue. It should be, it takes more time, or there's a consequence, or there should be another aspect to it that's flavored by the roll. But the clue's gotta come.
Yeah.
You don't get the clue, you're dead in the water.
I had just read this in the Sentinel Comics book, when they were talking about clues, and one of the things they said is, if someone fails their overcome to find a clue, give them the clue, but then have something happen, like
Yeah.
the villain's henchmen run into you before you can leave with the clue.
Yeah, you can't do anything about it
Yeah.
because you got to deal with something.
You didn't find it fast enough, but you found it.
Someday I'm going to write a D&D adventure where every ability check is automatically a success, in the adventure, and it just talks about if they fail, this happens.
Yeah.
To make it harder, and just write the adventure that way.
I've tried to do that with some aspects of our Avalon game too, where it's like, you didn't fail, you just didn't do it well enough to keep something else from happening.
It takes
That
this
to me is a
long,
lot
this
more
shows up,
interesting.
whatever.
Yeah,
I have a friend running a D&D game where he's got some relatively inexperienced players, and he was venting some frustrations to me, and part of it was, he's a little bit more old school in GMing, so doesn't have a lot of the newer concepts, and it was things like he has a player who has a high arcana and wanted to know what some other casters were casting, and he told him to roll a nature roll, and he's like, why would I roll nature? It's magic. And it's like, okay, I understand why the player is frustrated. I understand why you wanted a nature roll, because they were druids casting a nature spell. I'm like, have them roll arcana at disadvantage. That still lets the player make the roll. They just don't get the full information. Like, make sure the information is flowing and let the players feel competent. I think that's one of the key things that happens in a lot of games that lock the adventure behind certain key ability rolls. Like, if you can't get to that stuff, the player is frustrated because they don't feel like they're a competent character.
That's an advantage of the 2d20 system. It's very easy to build relatively new characters that are competent at their chosen professions, propulsion, whatever abilities, and it's easy to do.
I wrote a brief hack for 5th edition D&D that turns the skill system into gumshoe investigative abilities. Actually, it got used. Todd Crapper rewrote it for the world's greatest role-playing game, the zine. And like, I honestly kind of just want to play that sometime, because I think that would make such a big difference in D&D.
If I had read that article or seen your hack before I started running the Avalon game, I would have used that in the Avalon game.
Which is funny because, you know, if you read the player's handbook, none of this is in there. It's implied in the DM's guide. But if you watch Crawford or Perkins run their games, that's exactly how they run them.
Yeah.
They all run them on a sliding scale of success. So they just don't talk about it in the books like they play.
Yeah.
Probably because they just don't think about it, because that's just their brains are wired that way. But it certainly does inform an entire generation of binary results for DMs, and that's not
Yeah.
much fun. And of course, every DM starts that way, and you
This
learn.
is
and you
part of
get
the reason
better.
why Gnome Stew has been around for over 10 years.
Yeah. You
Uh-huh.
learn.
So we
We've got a
still need to
job.
talk about skills for DMs.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you learn and you get better, and then pretty soon you think the DC is just, you know, that's the uncomplicated success roll. But I'm way more interested in finding currency you're going to spend. I'm going to take a hit die. I'm going to make you use an inspiration. I'm going to have fun, and
Mhm.
I'm gonna make you spend all your big potions before you get to the big boss, if you use a video game analogy. Yeah, good stuff. I just like
Or you
games
make-
to support that.
Or you make your people really afraid of using potions.
Yeah, which you know, which you can't do in Quest either. So maybe it would be a great analog for the 5e game. So that's that was a low blow. But again, if you see when we talk about the possibilities of extending a system,
Mhm.
you know, for 5e or Fate to get those points, I don't know how I would do that with that Quest RPG, because it just wasn't
Yeah.
enough meat on the bone to make a stew. You know, I don't.
It's like when you're trying to glue something on and you don't have any, you know, surface area that's roughed up enough to actually get it to cling there. There's not enough texture to do much there.
Do some sanding.
So the last thing I wanted to run over was I wanted to go over some of the things we introduced in our session 0 and to see how many of them we actually kind of engaged with over the course of the game. So Charples, let's see. First off, your tell-all book definitely came up. That was your connection and why
Once or
Kethra
twice.
was there. Your belief was to expose Zalargo's corruption, which I believe that was what informed what you were doing. I don't think that really changed so much. It wasn't an active thing. Your flaw was that you were self-righteous.
A little bit.
Yeah, I think that still worked out. And your dream was changing the reputation of gnomes from assassins to equal citizens.
Utter failure. And that dream could never come true.
Yeah,
That's that's part of the motivation of the character.
I do think, though, it came through like with your interactions with the alchemist down in the Undercity and things
Those
like
are
that.
great
So
scenes.
I
Great
love that.
scenes. Yeah, those are
I think
great.
his
Those are
self-
some of the best parts.
His self-righteousness came out a lot when we were dealing with our halfling mob boss.
Yes.
It's like,
Yes, because he
Charples.
behaved like a spoiled child, which is exactly what I was going for.
stop poking.
Going
him.
up and down in that chair, I was trying to think of the most annoying behavior an 8-year-old could do. And that's exactly what that's how it came out. That's absolutely right. And I appreciate you pointing that out. Thank you.
So Mac, the connection we came up with for you, the strongest connection you had was actually unfortunately to Schmitty's character, and Schmitty couldn't keep playing. But we also had you connected with Kethra, you know, basically through the newspaper. Your belief was in justice, which I think still worked out. It definitely was guiding. Your flaw was righteous indignation. And your dream was a free and just city of towers, which you didn't necessarily achieve, but I think definitely the goal that everyone was working towards moved in that direction.
Yeah. Well, and it's also the sort of goal that is never going to be finished. Those goalposts are always going to move.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
That's a moving target all the way.
Yeah. A truly just society is always a goal, but it can never be attained.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to play a character who is aware of that, that this is something he can never achieve, but the effort is still worth it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Kethra, you know, your ties were that you were the bodyguard, so I mean that was a natural tie there.
Yep.
Your belief was in justice, and your flaw was that you were reckless. I think that definitely got a lot of play. The dream was recovering a lost dwarven artifact, and the
Yeah, honestly, thinking back on that, knowing where we were going, I could have picked something a lot more amenable to the setting and the story we were gonna do.
I feel bad because I didn't really work that even like at an angle into the story.
That's
I did sort of try to play a little bit with Nang and being a dwarf and having some connections, but Nang just put everybody off on the wrong. Like
That was
no
creepy.
one, yeah, nobody really wanted to be friends with Nang. So
no.
the trying to use that as my vector into more dwarfishness was not the best angle there. So I feel bad that I didn't really touch on that much, but I'm hoping
That's
you
pretty
still
out
had.
there though. I put one like way out here where everybody else was kind of in the wheelhouse.
So now let's look at Hazel's, which came up slightly later than everyone else's. What you had patched up Kethra in the past because she was reckless. Yeah, that was a good tie-in.
Yep.
Your belief was generosity, which yeah, I do think that came up.
Yeah.
Your flaw was that you're a hedonist. I think it came up, but I don't think it was active.
Yeah, it didn't have. I probably didn't lean into it as much as I could have.
But you were all very focused on doing the job too, so it
Yeah.
wasn't easy to do that. I do think though it came through, like especially with the vignettes of going into the apartment and and also weirdly in the relationship with Squabbles, I think to a certain extent.
Wobbles.
Squabbles.
And your dream was to eradicate sickness, mostly just trying to help as many people as you can. I think that definitely came up with the Warforged storylines.
Yeah, like again, that's not really an attainable goal in a small short campaign, but
Mhm.
I think movement was, the needle was nudged
Yeah.
in the work she was doing with some of the Warforged.
Yeah.
Now, as far as locations, where I had everybody come up with a location, Provisioner's Place definitely came up throughout the campaign multiple times. That was a great location. The Broken Mug didn't get used quite as much. That was the bar that I think we did use it once as a place where everybody kind of met after some stuff went down. I was a little sad that I didn't manage to work the Song of Sybaris in because I really would have liked to have a jazz club in there. And that was just, I never circled back around to it to make it plot critical, and it just never seemed to come up otherwise. That was a great thing to add in, and I feel bad that we didn't, swing back around to that. And the Brawl Barge, which was, we didn't use it a lot, but you jumped on it right away. Like you utilized that location immediately for a plot point, and I appreciated that. And let's see. Yep, you talked to Tap. I was looking at some of the characters that we came up with. Clubbert, that was a good long-term thing there. Tyven, I kind of wanted to have a reckoning with Tyven, but I think Tyven was really more the vector into the Watch and how they were being assholes. So his brother became more of an important thing to kind of beat down there. Otara could have been a much bigger deal. I knew, that she had the bust, and depending on what direction you went, you could have gone to her a lot sooner, and maybe Neng wouldn't have been as big a deal. So she was just kind of sitting out there, with a few different hints that were being dropped here and there.
And we completely ignored her until she was already dead.
That's okay.
Oopsie.
But overall, I really liked a lot of the interactions that people had. Tib Kurt, that was great. The alchemist that you got to interact with. I did, even though Mac didn't circle back around to it, I did like Esme and her flirting with you at the House Civis station. I really enjoyed introducing Tim Kirk's friend, the Warforged, because that led to some of my favorite stuff in there with the whole, you know, veteran story and everything. So
Yeah.
the only other thing that I really wanted to bring up is that both in this campaign and in the Streets of Avalon game that I'm still running, I wanted to say Phil from Misdirected Mark brought up a really good thing about running investigations, and it is something I did in both these campaigns, which is it makes it a lot easier. You don't have to worry about dropping the exact clues when you write out what the mystery is. Like when you know exactly what it is, it doesn't matter. It's the important part isn't that there's a clue in this warehouse. The important part is that this person did this and this is why they did it, you know, and that they want to cover it up because of this. And when you have that all written out, it's actually a lot easier to slot in other things on the fly, so you're not as worried about, well, I have to give them this clue and then that clue has to lead here. You know, that it's almost like designing the mystery in reverse, where it's
Right,
like,
I
no.
was going to say in detective fiction terms, as a GM, you're not writing a whodunnit. You're not
Yeah.
writing a Sherlock Holmes. Your job is to be a Columbo writer. You know, the Columbo question isn't who done it. We know
Yeah.
who did it.
Yeah.
We always see the rich white dude murdering somebody in the opening.
Yeah.
Opening in the cold open. The question in Columbo is, how's he going to get him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the question for GMs is you, the GM, know who did it and what's going on, but how are you going to lead us down the primrose path to it? And how are we going to go about getting them?
Yeah. All right. This has been a really good talk. I really like being able to kind of, you know, pick apart a campaign after it is ended. So I thank all of you for indulging me with this. You were all great players. I really enjoyed this game. Does anybody have any last words about the campaign?
I had a really great time. I loved the story that we got to tell. I thought that the four of us players formed a really good rapport and had a good back and forth going on. Jared, you did a great job of setting the scenes and coming up with interesting NPCs that were always out to throw things for a loop. So I had a great time, and I would love to play with you all again.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. I thank you for the last minute invite. Hey, do you want to play? We're playing on Thursday. Oh.
Well, I mean, we're so used to talking to each other on Zoom now that
I had a great time. Thank you for allowing me to play and being in such a fine group of role players. Really let you play around with some concepts and have real fun at the table, and that was just great. I enjoyed Quest, despite the harder thing I said earlier. It was still a lot of fun to play, and I absolutely respect what it's trying to do. And playing a newsroom is just so much fun. You know, you could lift that same concept into a detective room; it would work there too.
Yeah.
And, a lot of, you know, you could even do an intelligence agency and have the same kind of thing being done. But the newsroom was just exactly the 70s thing I was craving.
Yeah.
I was so happy to participate in that.
Still want to know what's going on with Gelmer.
What was going on with Gilmer?
What isn't going on with Gilmer?
Yeah.
I did not intend on creating Gilmer at first, and when I started thinking about who was in charge of it was in charge of the printing press, they just sprung into my head fully formed, and I was like, this is Gilmer, and Gilmer is 100% happy to be Gilmer.
There you go. I would just like to ditto what everybody else has already said, except for the late invitation, because I didn't get one. lot of fun. Enjoyed it. Would sit down at a table or on a screen with this group of people again any day. And it's been a pleasure. And thank you to everyone who watched the episodes. And hopefully you get some enjoyment out of it.
Yeah, I think on that note, I am going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you for everybody that joined us for this ride, whether you watched it or listened to it on the podcast. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you want to interact with me, have at it. And I will hopefully get to play with many or all of you again sooner or later or whenever, because I had a great time with this. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off now. Good night, everyone.
Good night.